We're live.
Hello, this is Larry from Blue Collar Nation. We're having a special episode today, and I have my tech whispering business partner, Mr. Eric Sprague, with us. How are you, Eric?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I am very happy these special editions are helping our listening audience with the situation that we're dealing with this virus. And today we have an amazing expert here today. We have Ed Cross, the restoration lawyer. How are you doing today, Ed?
Just fine. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm definitely honored to be here with you guys. And thank you for doing this and all your hard work. I think you guys are doing a great job.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you very much.
We've spent some time with you. I think you're an expert in this field. So,
well, thank you. I
don't-
hope I live up to your expectations.
don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, don't oversell me.
No. So, Ed, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, I mean, we had a really good podcast, full length podcast regarding Xactimate and all that. And then as this pandemic has happened and it really affects the cleaning and restoration industry, I reached out to you to see if we could talk about what guys should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, what they can say, what they can't say, because I'm afraid that a lot of my restoration brethren may be overstepping some bounds and get themselves in trouble, and I'm a little worried about that. So I would like if you could maybe help us get through the weeds to the myths and the truths and all of that good stuff. So
I'll do my best.
okay. Well, I guess I'd like to start off with, what are you seeing? I mean, you have a lot of clients who are restoration companies, especially. What are you seeing in the field for them that is facing them right now?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. So about a month ago, there was a whole surge of phone calls that we received in our office from contractors who wanted to get agreements, documents to perform this work. And some of them are doing a lot of it. Some of them aren't doing any of it. And we still, unfortunately, have a broad spectrum of different approaches and attitudes to it. On one end of the spectrum, we've got hoteliers in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, for example, saying, you know what, we're not going to have any professional services whatsoever. We're just going to have our janitorial staff do this. We don't have any confirmed cases. That's kind of what I would consider the more liberal side. And then on the most conservative side, we got very sophisticated restoration contractors who are still saying, you know what, I'm not sure if I'm going to get into this work or not. I'm not sure if I can keep my workers safe. I'm not sure what the value proposition is for the client, given the state of the testing, the technology, the disinfection capabilities, and what admittedly is some confusion in the industry about how to approach these jobs. And so one big point that I really want to leave everybody with today is that I think that the media and our leaders are shortchanging us. And by that, I mean they are failing to focus on the value and the benefits of professional remediation and disinfection services. So I turn on the news, I watch the politicians chewing each other up into pieces. That's what they always do. And the cable news, they like to feed that. But then when they get down to brass tacks, in terms of preventative measures, they don't talk about much other than social distancing and wearing masks and washing your hands. And then they skip to the reactive mode. What are we going to do for these people once they get sick? And then they argue about the ventilators and hospital beds and ICUs and intubation and all of that. But
Yeah,
what
the lack
about
of supplies, etc.
Yeah. What about the thousands of buildings out there that have been contaminated by the 500,000 plus COVID positive patients in this country that haven't been properly cleaned? And so I really wish the media and our leaders would say, hey, you know what? You need to get these properties cleaned up, because I really believe that the restoration industry, trauma scene, biorecovery industries can help to save lives here. This is an important opportunity. And eventually, a month from now, 3 months from now, whenever it happens, we're going to be talking about opening these buildings up again. And some companies, particularly on the commercial side, are going to want to have these places cleaned up, partly for PR reasons, but partly as risk management. And the challenge of it, obviously, is you come in, you do the work, somebody comes in and sneezes all over your work afterwards, and it undoes some of the benefit of it. And I heard a contractor down south the other day say something I thought was very funny. They say, you know, when we do this work, what we're doing is we're putting a clean diaper on the baby. So the diaper is clean, but then the baby's going to go ahead and do this baby business there.
Right.
And so hopefully there can be some ongoing monitoring of these buildings, and that there'll be some advancements in the technology, both for testing buildings and people.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that the people are going to want to have some assurance that their building is safe before they re-enter.
Right.
You know, I mean, yes, it's a good PR move for a business, but I think it's also a PR move internally to get the people to feel comfortable to come back to work.
Yeah, definitely. Worker safety is a giant issue in all of this.
Yeah.
And one of the best trainers out there, in my opinion, is Norris Gearhart. And he has a very interesting exercise he does. You may have heard about this. It's the chocolate pudding exercise. And he'll put somebody in full PPE and then cover the PPE in chocolate pudding. And the exercise is, can you get out of all of that PPE without getting any chocolate pudding on your skin? Naturally, that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But if they can practice that and learn that, then hopefully they can be safe doing this work.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I have seen, much to my chagrin, on social media, companies, and some companies that I actually know and was a little surprised. I've seen people doing COVID cleaning, and you've got a guy with his Tyvek suit halfway down because he's hot. I've seen hoods off. I've seen the feet cut off. I mean, I'm just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing here.
Right, yeah.
And that worries me, you know.
Yeah, as it should. And some of them will have the masks on the outside of the Tyvek, for example. And if you think about the chocolate pudding exercise,
It'd be a mess.
You take off your mask, but you've still got a contaminated Tyvek on, and you're going to be inhaling that.
Yep.
So hopefully they put the Tyvek on the outside of the mask. I don't hold myself out as a scientist. I'm a former certified indoor air quality consultant, but I'm a lawyer, and I stick to representing the restoration contractors.
Yeah, well, I mean, Larry and I know from our work with, you know, sewage and mold, these are big things that have to be practiced over and over and over. And that's where I think I get a little worried with some of the people. And that kind of leads me to the next question for you, Ed, is kind of, it's hard to answer definitively, but who should be doing this type of work and who should not? Because I think there's a lot of confusion. And the problem is that the consumer doesn't know what to look for in a company that can do this correctly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a marketing issue.
So, yeah, that's true. So there's a lot of different kinds of companies that have a lot of the basic building blocks of skills that would allow them to train a little bit further and do this work. Naturally, we look to mold remediation companies. They have a lot of the training that's relevant to this. I think that asbestos abatement companies, lead abatement companies, they're familiar with some of these steps, not all of them. But if you're in the trauma scene business, you do crime scene cleanups, you have 40-hour HAZWOPER training, or your AMRT. These are the types of companies that I think would be qualified to look into doing this kind of work. And there should be some additional training that goes along for this. Many different sources available out there for that. Nate Seward is a CIH and a professional engineer. He has the Academy of Textiles and Flooring, and he offers a coronavirus-specific training course with a certification. There are many other different trainers out there. The Restoration Industry Association provides a lot of great resources on its website, restorationindustry.org. I urge everybody to go there, because the RIA has recently put out a preliminary report together with the IICRC about some of the methods and risk issues dealing with this particular virus. So it's important to do your homework, not rush into this work unless you're doing it thoughtfully and carefully. Have an internal program for PPE and equipment decontamination and ongoing training, health and safety, etc. There's quite a bit to it. If I were running a business doing it, I'd like to have an industrial hygienist or a qualified environmental consultant who's advising me kind of behind the scenes on my own quality control measures. And hopefully we'll have at least some of these projects where the owners are going to be hiring their own environmental consultants to create a remediation or disinfection protocol. That's probably not going to happen on smaller jobs, and it's probably not going to happen very frequently unless there's a confirmed case. There's a shortage of industrial hygiene services in this country, and maybe a shortage of demand for it too, considering the risk. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Larry and I always felt better when they'd bring a hygienist in and they give us a scope of work and we just go do it. You know, we didn't have to create it ourselves. And so I think that leads to kind of a question. You know, you're talking about these really well-established and good restoration companies kind of putting their hands up going, I don't know if I want to do this. And unfortunately, that's who we want doing this kind of work.
Right.
So, you know, and I think too, the more established companies are probably more risk averse and, you know, are thinking through this a little more. And then the guys who are maybe a little bit more cowboy-like are just going for it, right? So what are the risks for the contractor?
Wow. Well,
I know that's huge.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So first off, this is going to be an incomplete answer. All right.
I understand that.
I'm gonna hit a few of the highlights here.
Perfect.
I'll kind of start from the top. And the first place that I think of naturally is worker safety. What are you going to do to keep your workers safe? And what are you going to do to give them a comfort level that they're going to be able to do this work and they're not going to be bringing home a lethal virus to their families? And I think it's worthwhile to have a written disclosure from the employer to the employee. And I've been developing one of these, which explains some of the basics about the coronavirus, the risk, how workers' compensation works. You know, if I were running a restoration company, I would want to have something in my personnel file for each of these workers showing that there were some fair and reasonable disclosures that were made. Employers are generally protected from worker injury and illness claims by the exclusive remedy of workers' compensation. But what a lot of people don't know is there's exceptions to workers' comp. And one of those is called fraudulent concealment. All right, employers shall not conceal from employees certain types of conditions that could be hazardous to them. So the value of having a notice like this in the personnel file would be that it would be a defense to a fraudulent concealment claim, which would be made in an effort to get around workers' compensation and make a civil claim in superior court against the employer.
Oh, yeah. So
now let's go on to the customer and the risks there. Well, it appears in the current state of affairs that the contractor is not going to have the benefit of knowing where the contamination is or how extensive it is. And this is very different from mold or asbestos. I can take a picture of a moldy wall, and then I can remove the mold, and then I could take another picture of the wall without the mold and show the customer, this is what I accomplished for you. You see the mold isn't here anymore. Not so with the coronavirus. You can't see it, smell it, touch it, and know that you're touching it. You can't photograph it. And right now, we don't have a specific test that's commercially available to confirm that the coronavirus is actually there. But if you've got somebody on your workforce who is sick and comes into a place just to do proactive cleaning, and the customer there comes down COVID positive, you're potentially subjected to a claim there that your workers made the occupants sick. There was a lawsuit filed last week in Illinois against Walmart by the family of a deceased Walmart employee. And one of the allegations in the complaint is that Walmart failed to identify which of its workers were COVID positive or exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19, and that they should have taken steps to protect the workers and to hand out masks and gloves and clean the touch points. So that's a case that we're going to be watching very, very closely. Yeah. One of the scary things about this that is in sharp contrast to mold, lead, asbestos, sewage, etc., is that this illness is contagious. And, we don't have that in the other types of work. So if somebody's careless, either they bring the coronavirus into an environment or they fail to disinfect a given environment and they get sued for that, well, then there's a chance of exponential liability. Well, I got sick, but I also got my brother sick and my son sick, and my son got his cousin sick, and it can really explode on you. So naturally, we want to think very seriously about our liability insurance. And I urge everybody to get together closely with your insurance company and your insurance broker. Find out if you have an exclusion for communicable diseases in your policy. Find out if you have a sublimit for communicable diseases in your policy. That would interfere with your ability for your umbrella policy to kick in on one of these claims. Sublimits can be very, very dangerous. Some companies assume that because their policy doesn't say anything about viruses, that there would be coverage for it. That's not necessarily true. So have a really clear understanding as to the extent of your coverage. And when you're renewing your insurance policy, chances are your liability insurance carrier is going to exclude coronavirus type claims. You have to disclose to your insurance carrier the type of work that you're doing and that there's a possibility of a coronavirus claim. If you're filling out a form and you just check a box that says you're doing water damage or mold remediation, that's not enough. That's not enough for them to assess the risk, and the underwriting department needs to know what they're being exposed to. So I can go on and on, but that gives you a few highlights.
So are there companies insuring this work?
There are a couple who are doing it. There was one that was in and then it was out. And the coverage for this is difficult to find, but you want to see, ideally, that you've got an affirmative grant of coverage in your policy where it actually says that you are covered for viruses. That's the best scenario, and to see that there's no sublimit for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of guys aren't even thinking about these things. They're just saying, oh, I'm slow, I need work, so right, I'm going to go take this work. And look, I get it. I mean, Larry and I owned a business for years and years and years, and yep, still own a different business. And that's the first thing as an entrepreneur that goes through your mind is, I've got 20 guys and I need to keep them busy.
Yeah. Of course.
But I don't know how many guys are thinking this all the way through, saying, does my insurance even cover this?
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah. So, okay. So what are your thoughts for the best companies, how they should move forward?
Well, we talked about the training piece and protecting the workers, and then the insurance part of it. And then the next piece would be, of course, really good communications with the customer. And, people come to me all the time saying, can you write a contract for me that guarantees that I won't get sued? No, I can't do
no
that.
Such thing.
No, sadly.
No such thing. The courthouse is open until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to go down there and file a piece of paper, they can. But what we can do is we can manage this risk. We can mitigate the risk. So when I am advising clients and drafting contracts, I have two simple goals. Number one, I want to reduce the total number of lawsuits. And then within the number of lawsuits that get filed, I want to reduce the severity of them. I want to limit the damages. I want to contain it so it hopefully doesn't put the company out of business.
So what are the things, and I know that you have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, California, Texas, and New York, you have like a contract package for COVID cleaning. Am I incorrect in saying that?
We have California, Texas, Florida, New York, and I'm just about to release Illinois, Washington, North Carolina, New Jersey, Georgia, and a bunch of others. Okay. So
would you mind sharing some of the basics of what you like to see in that type of stuff? And just for everybody who's listening, if you're in any of those states, just please go to Ed and get what you need.
Well, go to a competent lawyer. It doesn't have to be me. I'm going to outline a number of things that I think are good to think about in this process. And let's start off first with my favorite subject, which is the scope of work. When I draft a contract, I leave it open for the contractor to put in the exact description of what they're going to perform. And I have the dressing that goes all around it. And one important point is that I don't like to put into a coronavirus contract that we are disinfecting, remediating, removing, or eradicating. Those are absolute terms in some people's eyes. What we like to do instead is present to the customer that we are selling a process rather than a particular result, right? A great analogy I like to use is pest control. When the guy comes out to spread the stuff in my backyard to treat the red imported fire ants that bite my feet when I'm in the backyard playing badminton, he doesn't guarantee me that he's going to get all the ants. I don't expect him to get all the ants. I expect him to treat it, to try to mitigate it. So what I put into my coronavirus service contracts is that the contractor is going to work in good faith and in a good and workmanlike manner to mitigate the risk of transmission of novel coronavirus 2019. And what the customer is buying is a process rather than a particular result. When you're getting into one of these agreements, I think you should give some thought as to the security of the facility. What's going to happen in the building at the time that you're doing the work? For example, what if you're 3/4 of the way done and somebody comes in and sneezes all over your work? Are you going to charge to start over or re-cleaning? This is a healthy discussion to have, reach an agreement on that, and put that into your contract. A big point of contention is whether or not an environmental consultant is going to be involved as a retained consultant for the owner of the building. Ideally, we would have that. And the analogy that I like to use is a doctor and a pharmacist. A doctor will write a prescription in the way that an industrial hygienist will write a protocol for a remediation job, right? The pharmacist's responsibility is to fill that prescription in the way that it's written. If the doctor wrote the wrong prescription and prescribes Eric penicillin and he's allergic to penicillin, that's not the pharmacist's fault. So if the environmental consultant makes a bad decision and no reasonable contractor would have recognized that it's a bad decision, then that will fall on the hygienist and the consultant for the responsibility for that. I like to put in an indemnity provision where the owner is going to indemnify the contractor for any sorts of errors or omissions on the part of an environmental consultant. We need to think very seriously about the fact that as soon as the property is reoccupied, that it could become recontaminated, and we need to put that in the agreement, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Give some thought to implied warranties. Most states have implied warranties of fitness, implied warranties of merchantability. I like to put in a waiver of those, and instead an explanation as to exactly what the contractor is responsible for and not responsible for, and then they can fulfill that. And it's good to take pictures and video while you're doing the work so you can prove that you did the work, because when they come back into the property, as I understand it, the place is going to look and smell the same way it did before you started the work, unless there's gross contamination and you've got to do a lot of deep cleaning, obviously.
Yeah.
This work typically is going to involve the use of some sort of antimicrobial or a biocide or a disinfectant. The RIA has been careful to state that the best way to articulate this in dealing with customers is that you are applying a disinfectant as opposed to just disinfecting. There's a difference between actual disinfection and
right.
the application of disinfectant, like I mentioned earlier with the pest control example.
Yeah. No,
when you're using these products, I think it's good to include some disclosures about the products themselves. Include the SDS sheets, include a specimen label, so people understand what the issues are and what their potential exposure is, and that you're not making any medical advice to them about, is this going to be healthy for them or not. They're accepting the liability for that.
Right.
I think it's worthwhile to have a discussion with the customer about the fact that there could be a less expensive alternative to doing the work. And your personal industrial hygienist may tell you, you know what? Instead of spending X dollars on this work, the people could go to a hotel for a few nights or a number of nights, whatever number you happen to believe, to allow the virus to become deactivated or non-viable. And if you can just close up a building and walk away, if that in fact is the science, then is it better to spend money cleaning or not? That's a judgment call, and it's a worthwhile discussion to have with customers. Last but not least, and there's a lot of other points, but in terms of indemnity, this is always an important issue. I think it's worthwhile to consider having a provision where the customer indemnifies you from any loss or injury that results from your inability to totally eliminate the virus from the environment, from any harm that might happen, like if papers are going to curl because you're spraying disinfectant in there. They should indemnify you from harm that results from the reintroduction of the virus into the property once they come back on, the spreading of the virus by any individuals who are associated with the property or coming into contact with it. And what about excluding the areas where you're not going to work? A lot of companies are not doing the ventilation systems. They're not duct cleaning. They're not wiping ceilings. They're not treating the walls more than 8 feet up. I think it's a good idea to have that excluded from the contract.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, that's the thing. It's so, where does it end? And I was listening to a webinar done by Dr. Richard Wade, who's a environmental health expert with Omega Environmental. And he was, showing the graph. And, he's showing how many cases there are and how rapidly they're going. But, his point was from anywhere from a factor of 10 to 100, there's asymptomatic people who are running around spreading this and have no idea that they even have it. Yeah. So how in the world could you ever, be held accountable for that cleaning once you're done? You wouldn't know.
Right.
You have no idea. It's like endless, is my point. Like, the contract has to be open-ended enough to protect you. Right.
But what some contractors tend to do is disclaim away so many of the customer's rights that the customer isn't left with any rights. All right. So naturally, as a matter of marketing and good business, there has to be a value proposition to the customer. But in order for all of your tidy little disclaimers and releases of liability to be enforceable, you first have to have an enforceable contract. In order to have an enforceable contract, the contractor should be making a written offer to the customer that has some reasonably specific and definite terms in it that are definite enough so that a court could actually enforce that contract against the contractor. What happened back in the early days of mold remediation, guys would come into my office and they'd say, here's my mold remediation contract. It says mold remediation agreement at the top of it. And then down in the fine print says, we are not responsible for mold.
Right. Yeah.
Well, then what are
It's used to having in the first place.
responsible? Well, I don't want to get sued for mold, so I'm just going to leave that out. Well, the homeowner lawyers go berserk with that. They say,
True.
you have unfettered discretion to decide how you're going to do the work. And for that matter, decide if you're even going to do the work at all. So there has to be some specific promises and commitments that the contractor is making in their way. I like to put it is, performing the process in a good workmanlike manner, in a good faith effort to try to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And I think, Ed, that's probably a good place to end. So thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any final words for Larry and I or anybody that's listening?
Well, I hope you guys will keep up the good work. You add a lot of good positive energy to the industry. And I hope that everybody who's not already a member of the Restoration Industry Association will join at restorationindustry.org. There's a lot of exciting things going on, including all the activities of the Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee, which is there to level the playing field for restorers.
Yeah. Ed, we'd love to have you back on once that we start seeing the fruits of all those labors, because we already had the one where I was complaining about how the playing field was uneven. I can't wait to have the one where you tell me that it's even now or very close.
Moving in that direction. Yeah.
Good things happening. I think you're going to be pleased.
Yeah, very good.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks, Ed. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and we thank you for coming on.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.
You too.